Number one, how do you review a feature in GTViewer? There's actually several ways to do it. There are two main modes in GTViewer that are normally used: the zoom mode and the attribute info mode. They do approximately the same thing. In zoom mode, I can drag right and down to zoom in, and I can drag right and up to zoom out. I can also zoom or drag to the left and up to go to the previous position. Now, if I click the mouse button anywhere in the screen, it is going to center on that point. Now, if I switch to the attribute info mode, I can still zoom in, I can still zoom out, I can still go to the previous view, but the mouse click will review the feature, and you'll see the attribute info dialog display when I click something. Let me click another one, or another one. Now, the second way to review a feature is to press the right mouse button on the feature you want to review. So if I right click on this poll, it's the first item in the menu. I can click the menu item and it does the attribute info dialog. The same thing for a different feature. Now, it doesn't matter what mode you're in to do the right mouse. Let's change to the pan mode, which just lets me pan around. If I right click now, I still get the poll to review or primary conductor. It doesn't matter what I select. I personally think that's the easiest way to do it, although I see most people in the wild using the attribute info mode, and that's probably because it's been around a lot longer than the right mouse click, but not that much longer and since GTViewer's been around. The third way is to do a query. Let me run a simple query for, let's find a poll. Now, if I click on any item in the query results, it will locate on it, but you'll see there's an info button at the bottom of the dialog. If I press that, it will review the selected feature in the query results. Let's do another one. And that's the same as if I went over here and right mouse clicked, selected the poll on the menu, and got the attribute info. Number two, what if I select a point where multiple features are located? Typically, there's just going to be a single feature. So if I right click, I'll find one feature. Now, if I click over here where there are multiple features, you'll see it gives me all of the items at that point in the list. And if I move the mouse across the menu items, it will highlight or flash that feature to show you which one it is. And then I can finally pick the one I want. Let's do that again in a different spot. There's several features here. And again, you pick the one you want. That was using the right mouse button to select the feature. If I use the attribute info mode, it works in a similar way, where if I click the button here, it shows me just the menu items for the pick list. Number three, what are the different tab types in the attribute info dialog? There's several different ones, and I'm going to run through them all pretty quickly. If I review a feature, I'll just pick something at random here. It shows the normal blue drum icon for all of the tabs. These blue drums are the standard records from the database for the feature. The one exception here is the element tab. It's always provided, and it is the actual information about the element itself, the color, the symbol, etc. If I select a valve here, this one has a yellow tab, or a yellow drum on the tab. This is a custom tab, and the custom tabs are defined when the data is set up, and it can show record information from any record all on one tab, and it's always the first tab. We can still look at the other tabs. They're the same as that, only this one has been divided up. It's information from both the connectivity and the valve record. Now, another type of special tab indicator is for user data. And user data is information that we embed onto a red line. So I'm going to draw a red line, just an arrow, and I'm going to select it, and I'm going to edit the attributes on it. And I'm just going to type something in. I'll say there's a leak. And let's add one more just so it'll have more than one piece of data. Put my name. Now, we don't see anything except if we review it. We see it says it's user data, and I click it, and it's a green drum, and it's got the two fields that I added. Now, on a similar thing, let's switch to the electric view, and the demo data has a pole inspection app that's provided by, as an example. I'm going to run this pole inspection app, and I'm going to inspect a pole. I'll pick this one here. Now, it loaded in the information for the pole. Let's say it wasn't really 35 feet tall. It's 37 feet tall. I'm going to save it. It puts this little mark on it. I'm going to close the form out. It puts this little mark on the pole to indicate that it's been inspected. And if I review the pole now, I have both the pole symbol and a pole inspection record. I'm going to click the pole inspection record, and it's a red drum. Now, usually custom apps like pole inspection, they will embed the data they collect on the red line itself, and that's what this one has done, and that's why the symbol's red, because it's embedded on the red line. And this is all the information in the form. Now let's zoom out here, and I'm going to go up to the substation here. There's the substation in the demo data has a detail associated with it. So I'm going to select the substation, and you'll notice that there is a tab with a little chain link on it. If I select it, you'll see that it's got a transmission yard description for the detail drawing that is, in this case, is an intelligent detail, and I can either double click on the record here, or I can select it and select the activate button at the bottom. I think it's easier just to double click on it. Let me move the attribute info out of the way. Here's the intelligent detail. I can select something in it just to show that it's intelligent. And there are other types of details as well, like images, and I'm going to show you one. Let me find a particular pole here that's got one, and I'll review it. This particular feature has a lot of things on it. It's got a custom tab, it's got regular tabs, it's got a link, which in this case is a JPEG file, and it's also got this little photo image icon, which is a preview, and you get previews if they're images. Now, if I had gone to the link tab and double clicked on this, it would still show me the image just using whatever image viewer is available on your computer. There is one final type of tab. I'm going to switch our view to the fiber view, and I'm going to review this fiber cable. Now, it's got the single blue drum tabs, but it's also got a double drum for the fiber records. Now, if I select it, this means it's a repeating component, or a repeating tabular component where there's multiple records of the same type for this particular feature. And instead of showing it as a column of attributes and values, this is the columns are the attributes and the rows are the actual records. And there's quite a few attributes on here if we scroll out. Now, one thing special about this is you can click on the headers to sort. You click it again, it sorts the other way. This is also true for just the regular ones that show just a list of attributes and values. It's just not as meaningful for the sort. and they're usually the order has been predetermined, so sorting may change the order that it was meant to be presented to you, but it is still available and you can still sort. Number 4, copying and printing from the attribute info dialog. There's a couple of ways to copy information from the attribute info dialog to the Windows clipboard, and I'm going to go through those. Let me zoom in on a feature. I'll move it over closer to the center of the screen, and I'm going to review the poll. And any of this information on the current tab can be copied to the clipboard by pressing the copy button, which is at the bottom of the attribute info. I'm going to press the copy button, and I'm going to go to another application, Excel in this case, and paste that information in. You may have to format it to make it look a little better, but it's the same information that's in the dialog. Let's do another one just to show that it can be anything. I'll copy that one and go back to Excel and paste that in. Now you can do something a little more complicated if you have the repeating records as our fiber cable does. Let me switch over to fiber. I'll review this fiber cable. I'll go to the tab with the repeating records and I'll copy it and then go back to Excel. Let me scroll down so I have some empty space and I'll paste that in. Now this is a little more Excel-like because it's more rows and columns rather than just a row of attributes or a column of attributes and a column of values. This is not the only way to copy information to the clipboard. Let's go back to the poll that we were looking at earlier. Now, if you double click on any cell in this grid, it's going to copy that piece of text to the clipboard. I'm going to double click on 406. If you look at the status bar, it says it copied 406 to the clipboard. Let's do a couple others here. I'll do the combined info, or you can do the headers. It doesn't matter what you double click on. It's going to copy that one cell to the clipboard. Now, I guess we need to show that it's actually there. I copied the 406, which is the poll number, to the clipboard. Let's run a poll query. I'm going to just right click on the form and paste that in. If this was a more complicated number, this would be a little more useful, but 406 will work. I'll say OK, and it's going to locate that poll, which is the poll we just reviewed. The one difference of this is when you have the repeating records and you have the grid of values. Let's go back to our fiber and go to our rows and columns of values. Now, if I click on an individual cell, it's going to copy that. You'll see it says green or brown or white or 960. Now, if I click on the row number, it's going to copy the whole row. And if I go to Excel again, let me scroll down a little and paste that in, it gives you that single record in the attribute value columns. Now, this can be used for anything on any tab except the detailed information, like let's go back to the poll. You can't double click these because it's going to activate. When you double click, it's going to activate the link, and the photos don't copy either from double clicking. Okay, so that's copying to the clipboard. You also have the ability to print the information from the attribute info tab that's selected. And let's bring up one more again, and you'll notice there's also a print button next to the copy button. It's hard to show this on a video, but it's just going to bring up the printer. I picked to PDF. I've already done these, so I'm going to just show you. I'll skip to the output here. And this is what the page looks like that it prints. Now, I did this for a few other features. Here's a transformer. And I also did the fiber where it's the repeating records. Number 5, the element tab in the attribute info dialog. Let me select a feature to review and go to the element tab. It's always the last tab in the list. And the element tab tells you information about the graphical element that you've selected. It tells you how it's, or what the geometry is, how it's connected to the database, what styles it's using, what the thresholds are, if there's dynamic graphics connected to it, if there's tooltips connected to it, and it tells you all of that information about the element itself. Now, that information may only be useful to certain people, like people that are managing the data or configuring the data or setting up new features. This information is very valuable to them. And it may or may not be as valuable to your typical user, but there may be things in it that are useful to them. And it can be turned off if you don't want to have your users to have access to it. So let's run through the list of what's in the element tab data here. The first thing is always the type. This is the actual element type, a line, string, a circle, an ellipse, text, symbol, dimension element. It's all of those. The next item is which GTViewer category it's in. And this is the GTG file, the graphics file, that is holding that particular element. The filter ID is how the display and various style information is linked into the feature, and it's all based on this filter ID number, which in this case, this is a primary conductor line is the name, and it's filter ID 40. As well on the category, it was category number 4. It's often necessary to have the category numbers, and these are the way to find the numbers as well as the names. The source feature and source component comes from the GIS. And this information is dependent on where the information came from. If it was GTEC information, this would be the feature number, and it would also have a feature name, and then it would have a component number and also a component name. It just depends on what the source of the data was. The file offset is the actual offset into the file, the GTG file for this particular graphics element. And there's various things that use this, like especially if you're using the API to develop your own apps. A lot of stuff is category, and offset is how you specify a particular element. It'll tell the length of the element if it's a linear. If it's a shape, it'll give you the area as well. This is a line string, so it's got 12 points, and it lists you all of the points. Now, an interesting thing about the points that it lists here, if I select one, let's find one that's in the view, it will draw a little circle around it. Now you may wonder why it doesn't show all of them. Well, it's because they're off the screen. This is a fairly large element. And I've selected this on purpose because if you double click on one, it will locate you on that element and you don't have to go find it. So if I double click on this, it'll just keep going down the line until we get to the other end. Now, if we keep going down the list, it's got the linkage 1 and 2. These are the keys that connect this element to the database. And the type or the values for these linkages or how many of the linkages are used is dependent on your data type. In this particular data set, it uses 2 linkages. And if you looked up a record in the tabular data, you would need these 2 values to find it. Now, in some data like GTEC data, there's only 1 key, the FID, and the linkage 1 is always 0, but it still works the same. The data ID is which data.txt file this graphic element is going to use to look up the tabular data, and that's all defined in the category and the GTViewer GTM file. This particular feature that I selected has a style associated with it, and you'll see it's got a color and a weight. It just changed the original style, but it's telling you what that is right here. If we pick another feature like a poll, and in this particular data set, the poll doesn't have a style associated with it. It's just using this instance data right here, color, weight, style, and it's got the font and the text symbol or the text. So it just depends on what the data is as to what it's going to show you. Now the threshold, this is when I'm back on this primary conductor here. The primary conductor is shown from zoom level 0 to 10,000. Now this is a category threshold. There's also filter level thresholds, and if we pick something like a text element out here, this poll text, you'll notice that it also has a filter threshold. And the filter threshold is always inside the category threshold. Once you're outside the category threshold, the whole category is off. If you're in the category threshold, then it uses the filter threshold to determine if that particular feature is turned on or off. There's also a dynamic graphics list here. There could be tooltip information. Let's find something with a tooltip. I think a poll has tooltips. Yeah, feature tooltip. It'll tell you the tooltip information. This one also had dynamic graphics. It has a dynamic graphics action associated with it. Doesn't mean it's being used, but it is associated with it. And all of this information can be used to help configure your styles, to debug problems. I use it all the time, but I'm also setting up data all the time. So I think it's more useful to your people that are working with the data as opposed to your average user, but it can still be used for various things. One last thing to show is the edit style button. And if you do select a feature that has a style associated with it, let's go back to this primary conductor. It's telling us the style rule here, but if I say edit style, it brings up the style manager with the style that feature being selected. So I could double click on that and I could look at the style information and I could change it. Now the change would only apply to my session, but you can set up your styles like you want and then re-export out your style definitions and permanently update the data. So the edit style button is only available if you've enabled it. It's off by default, but it can be turned on if you need it. And it's usually not used by your normal users, so that's why it's off by default. Number 6, secrets of the attribute info dialog. I'm going to give you 4 secrets of things that you can do in the attribute info dialog that you probably don't know about. Now, whether or not those will be useful to you is another story, but I'm going to tell you and you can figure out if they're useful for you or not. By default, everything in GTViewer is selectable, but it is possible to set a category or a filter ID to not be selectable. And in the demo data, the land base is unintelligent and there's no tabular data associated with it. So all of the land base category is not selectable. And if I go into my demo data here and try to right click on the road edges or the trees or the buildings, all of that is unselectable. Now, let's say I want to select it just this one time or this one session in GTViewer and not allow everybody else the ability to select it. All I have to do is say Control Shift Alternate S as in select, and it will show you this dialog. All categories and filter IDs are now selectable. And if I go in here and try to review the road edge, I get it. I also can get the trees, vegetation, the buildings. All of that is now selectable. Now, if we look at the attribute info that I got, all I get is the element tab because there's no tabular data associated with it. Now, this mode of being able to select everything will be active until you restart GTViewer, but you can say file reload if you're in GTViewer 15, and if you right click now, see everything's not selectable again, it reset it back to the defaults. Okay, the next secret is how to get the edit style button to show up on your attribute info dialog if it's not been enabled. And this is usually something that's very useful if you're trying to set styles and you don't want to go change the GTM file to allow everyone access to it. So let me review something that has a style on it. I'm going to use a primary conductor, and we see there's a style defined for primary conductors, except there's no edit style button, which we saw earlier. Now, To permanently enable it, there's an entry you can add to the additional properties section of the GTM file. If it's set to 1, and then it'll always be available to everyone. So let me exit out of that. I'm going to say Control Shift Alternate E for edit, and it says the edit style mode has been enabled on the attribute info dialog. So now if I go back and review this primary conductor and go to the element tab, see here we have the edit style button. I can use it, and we could change the weight or whatever we want to do to this. Now, one thing to keep in mind is if you have your attribute info dialog displayed and then you do the keystroke, you're going to have to exit out of it and come back in before the button shows up. The next secret is something that you'll really have to have a specific need to do this, but I want to show it just because you never know. It may be something you've always wanted. I'm going to zoom in to an area, and I'm going to review this primary conductor. And I picked this particular element because it's got a couple of curves. It's not just a simple thing. It would be hard to draw if you wanted to draw it, in other words. Now, there is a secret keys that you can press. Control Shift C as in copy, and it will copy your attribute info dialog has to be active, and it will copy the element that you started the attribute info dialog from and add it to your redlines or to your session graphics category. Now you'll see that you can see the handles on the line that it pasted back in there. Now, depending on which version of GTViewer you have, the behavior of this is a little different. Sometimes it just pastes it back in black. It doesn't select it, or it'll paste it in color and not select it. But in the latest version of GTViewer, it does select whatever it pasted back, and you can see it there with the handles. Now I can drag this off, and you'll see that it copied the whole element, and it does change it to your current color that you have selected, but it doesn't change the style or anything. Now this is a red line from now on. I can pick it, I can drag the points around, I can do whatever I want. I can rotate it, I can scale it. It's just a red line, and it does not affect the original element. Okay, the last secret is something that may be useful to you. I usually forget about it and don't remember to do it. And let's say we've got a bunch of dialogues, attribute info dialogues up. Let's get several here. Now it always stacks them on top of each other, but if you're like me, I move them around so I can compare them or whatever. And sometimes I'll have 10 or 15 stacked on top of each other and you can't see it, and then you have to click through all the OKs to get them to go away. Well, there's a keystroke. You can just say F4, function key 4, you get rid of all of them all at once, and that might be useful to you.